Thank you.
Welcome, 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 everyone. Welcome to Care Concierge with Care Patrol, where education is the heart of everything we do. We educate clients and patients who are in crisis or planning mode, understand what options for care are available, how you qualify, how these are paid, and what they cost. And we do all of this at no charge. Only about 20% of the people that call us can actually afford to place or qualify for assisted living, which is how we're paid. We're paid by assisted livings, but we counsel people on all sorts of things. So if you have people that have questions about what Medicare pays for or Medicaid, send them our way. We're happy to talk to them. It's free, and we exist because of your referrals and the opportunity to serve, which is why we are here. We are accredited by the Alabama Board of Nursing and also the Alabama Board of Social Work to provide 1.0 contact hour for today's continuing education. In order to receive the contact hour, you must complete the online evaluation. And I know that some of you participate by phone, or you're having lunch at your desk, or you're gratefully able to multitask, and you may not be looking at your screen. I've posted the evaluation link into the chat room. If you're not familiar with Zoom, move your cursor to the top of your screen or to the bottom. A bar will appear. On that is a word chat. Click on it and join the discussion. We do very much encourage discussion during each presentation. I know that our speaker, as well as I, as well as those on the call, will be gratified by hearing your observations and outcomes and questions. And we look forward to hearing from you today. To do so, just pop something in the chat room or raise your hand and I'll unmute you. In order to do the evaluation, you must know the evaluation link. It is, if you're taking notes, https colon / www.surveymonkey.com / lowercase r / all uppercase letters Y, T as in Texas, X, N as in Nancy, 3, C as in cat, F as in Frank. That is our evaluation link. And remember, that link is password protected. You must have the password to take the evaluation. We give the password at the end of today's talk. And in this way, the Alabama Board of Social Work view this hour as a live or classroom hour. And without further ado, I'll welcome our speaker. We're most grateful to have her, Dr. Aditi Sethi, who's with the Center for Conscious Life and Death, who will speak to us about a number of topics that I think will be both sobering and refreshing. And we look forward to hearing more from her and Dr. Sethi. I'll step aside. I may interrupt you with questions and allow you to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Sean. It's good to be here with you all. Now, are you all from in the Birmingham area? Sean, is everybody joining from the Birmingham area or
They could be from
outside?
all over the state of
Okay,
Alabama,
beautiful.
some from other states. A lot we get folks from Georgia, New York,
Wonderful.
Rhode Island. It's the internet.
Oh, wonderful. All right. Well, so I'm honored to be here with you all. And today I'd like to go over the reality of death and dying in America, and I would extend it to the modern world. talk about community supported end of life care models and something called the Omega Home Network, discuss the role of an end of life doula, and talk a little bit about the Center for Conscious Living and Dying here in Asheville, North Carolina, which Sean mentioned I'm the founder and director of. Oh, let's see, where did that toggle go? Lost it. There we go. So I'd like to share a little bit about my journey with end of life care and my background. So I began volunteering for hospice about, let's see, 30 plus years ago when I was an undergraduate student. I was an undergrad at Davidson College in North Carolina. Grew up in Georgia and have lived in Birmingham, Alabama before. But yeah, ended up in North Carolina and started volunteering for hospice because at our undergrad, they really valued community service. So as an incoming freshman, there was this big volunteer fair and they had different booths set up, and one of them was the Hospice of Charlotte booth. And I thought to myself, what is hospice? Tell me more. And this woman lovingly told me that, as a student, as a young person, you can learn the skills necessary to support people in their final 6 months of life. And I was very moved by that possibility and thought, wow, why would you trust somebody as young and youthful as a 17-year-old to do it? And it sparked my curiosity. So I decided to do the volunteer training and did end up becoming a hospice volunteer throughout my undergraduate years. And I found that the simply being present for people in this season of life um, was so supportive and helpful. And I watched nursing staff, social work support, like the chaplaincy support, all of the uh, providers that make up the interdisciplinary team for hospice offered such loving presence and care and good medical care too for those who were dying. I was very moved and transformed. And so when I ended up going to medical school, I went to the Medical College of Georgia to, gosh, when was it? 2004. I noticed that very few people were talking about death in the medical system, let alone there was almost no training in end of life care as a medical student. 1 hour of a film called Wit, which is a film about a woman with cancer. So it was more about her cancer journey and the dehumanization she experienced as a cancer patient. But it didn't really, there wasn't a lot of in-depth study of what dying looks like, how you can support people to be comfortable, how you can support people to approach this season. It was very much death was the failure. And that, having been a hospice volunteer and seeing the beauty of a home death and then witnessing ICU deaths and untended deaths, I was it left a huge impression on me. So I became an activist then. I sort of started lunch and learns and I began talking about death and advanced directives and all the things, advanced care planning. And I know you've had talks on hospice and palliative care, so I won't spend too much time talking about the nuances there, but I will touch on some. So fast forward, I ended up going to becoming a Asheville, North Carolina, where I currently live. And again, similar things, death was not talked about. And there were oftentimes aggressive interventions done in the final month of life. And you all probably know this, it's well documented that a huge amount of healthcare dollars are spent in that last month of life for people. Really, I say in an attempt to avoid death, knowing that death is near, but really kind of gripping to every possible intervention that could sustain life, really. And so I ended up finishing my training and spent a year in fellowship, a hospice palliative care fellowship, studying end of life care and really specializing in end of life care. So when I graduated in 2012, I joined a nonprofit in Asheville called Care Partners and worked in a 26-bed inpatient hospice facility. And it really was one of the most rewarding places to be. And gradually, that nonprofit got bought by a for-profit entity, and the culture started shifting. And that's about 70% of hospices are for-profit. Not that they're not doing wonderful work, but in some cases, it can negatively impact the experience for providers. Saying it nicely, but um, and during that time, during the COVID journey that we all faced, I ended up taking care of a young man who was diagnosed with a glioblastoma, who was 36, and he was dying of a brain tumor. Really, well, was diagnosed during the pandemic, and he started documenting his dying journey on Facebook, social media, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. And when he was dying, he put out a call on his platform saying, I'm dying and I'm in a hospice setting. I want to die in community and I want to film my dying journey. And I got called into his care. And long story short, I ended up caring for this young man in the inpatient unit. And they wouldn't allow us to document, to film. And so we rallied a community to discharge him to a home setting, provide that 24/7 care, film his dying journey, and he died peacefully and with support of a community they were all strangers to him. That documentary, there's a documentary that is out called The Last Ecstatic Days that you can view, and I'll share about that later. But that journey for me catalyzed my desire to do something different, to offer another way of dying that exists around the world but is not a common way, which is community supported death care. And so that's where I am now. I left my career as I knew it. I'm still doing part-time doctoring, 1 weekend a month at a hospice about an hour from here, and then really committed to this nonprofit, the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. So a little bit about my path and what I'm doing here.
Sorry, one statement.
Yeah.
Lacey Vinson says, I am a regional bereavement care coordinator for a local hospice in Alabama, and it has been such a reward, but can be very trying at times. Thank you for what you and your organization do.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll speak to some of that trying, the aspects of it that are trying, a little bit. So around the time I left, I put my notice in, which for me was unusual to not have a plan. I left, I knew I had to dive into something else, using my experience, but being separate from the medical model for a while anyway. And around that time that I made that decision, this commission paper came out. And for those of you that don't know, The Lancet is one of the oldest medical journals in the world, and it's been around, I think, 1800s maybe. And they came out with a 40-page commission paper looking at death globally, in developed nations and underdeveloped nations. And the title of this commission paper, which you can Google and find the PDF for, is The Value of Death, Bringing Death Back into Life. And the outline of the principles that they say are like a principle of a realistic utopia, the ideal for how death could be approached globally, was laid out in these 5 principles, which are very simple, but yet underutilized and not looked at. And so the new vision of how death and dying could be is that number one, we look at the social determinants of death, dying, and grief. We look at how race, how gender, how socioeconomic status, how all these social determinants impact the dying experience for people around the world. Number two, they suggest that dying should be looked at not as a physiologic and I would say medical event, but rather a relational and spiritual process. This is the universal experience that all of us will face despite how we live and what our human experience is. We will all face this reality. And so can we look at it with more holism? And then the third was that networks of care can lead the support for people who are dying, caring, and grieving. So what that means is that right now, majority of people in the U.S. rely on family and community. Even if they don't have it, that's what they need to have to die comfortably at home. Um, or they hire help or get put in a facility or die in a hospital. So could we expand those networks of care to look at creative ways of supporting people to die in their home and support people who are grieving and not just rely on professionals because there's a larger need that potentially could be met by these other networks of care that are currently leading the way. And number four was that we start to bring conversations and stories about death and dying back to the dinner table, for example, that we start to engage with conversations about death, dying, and grief with our friends, with our community in a way that isn't so taboo, doesn't make people so uncomfortable, that normalizes this experience and this reality. And then number five, this understanding that death has value, something that is so foreign for most of the modern world. I would say death phobia and death denial are the pervasive relationships to death. It's like it's too painful to look at. It's too painful to imagine my loved one dying. I don't even want to talk about it until we have to face it. So I highly recommend you check this commission paper out. It's very inspiring if you're interested in learning more. It's easy to find. So Jim Morrison says no one gets out of here alive. So I want to take a moment to just honor that death. When you reflect on death, everyone when you if you ask people to reflect on death, you'll see that everyone's vision of how they want to die or how they relate to death is unique and different. And this idea of a good death, everyone's idea is different. I don't use the term good death anymore because it's so relative. For Ethan, this young man that I got to take care of, had the honor of taking care of, he was surrounded by a community of strangers. And he was surrounded by ritual and ceremony and music and prayer, and that is not for everybody. So his death may, if you watch the documentary, you might think, oh, that's not how I would want to die, but it's one way of dying. The other way, many of you have seen, is in an ICU hooked up to a bunch of machines. So again, and some people might say, I want to go out that way because at least I've tried everything I could do to prevent dying. So to each their own. And we want, as community members and providers of healthcare and um, psychosocial care support, we want to honor the wishes of those who are dying. And something to remember is a little knowledge and planning can go a long way. So there's a guy, David Kessler, who's a well-known author and grief worker, and he said we plan more for a weekend getaway than we do our own death. And then just sitting with that, it's remarkable to think of that being the reality for many of us. And the most important thing when we're thinking about death and planning for death is just to talk about your wishes to your loved ones because that increases the chances that your wishes will be honored. Returning to death as not being a medical event, something to remind yourself of, and then as you're counseling people who are facing death, is just to remind them that with or without medical intervention, death is an inevitable part of life, inevitable part of life. Some people don't even think about this, and it took me. I didn't really consider death not being a medical event until maybe a couple of years after my fellowship training, when I was already in practice and attending. It just didn't occur to me. I just thought, yeah, death is what happens when medicine can't save you. So just a nice reminder that it is not a medical event. Historically, death, like being born, was a family, communal, and religious event, a natural part of life. It moved out of the homes and into medical institutions by the 20th century. And about 70% of folks die in institutions currently, though 70% of folks, when you ask them, would say they want to die at home. So many people die in nursing homes, hospitals, facilities, other inpatient facilities, or um, wherever their home is at that moment. And so few of us, I mean, it was remarkable when I was working in this 26-bed freestanding hospice facility, it was remarkable how few people had been exposed to a dying person. And so few of us have that personal experience of death because we are so distant from it. When I was growing up, I was born in India, grew up in the South in Augusta, Georgia, and we would go back to India. And I was always struck by how death and life and aging and poverty and all it was all in plain sight. There was nothing hidden from view. And that left an impression on me as well, how we care for our elders and how we put them oftentimes away. You know, we don't feel like elders have value. I'm generalizing here. I know many of us probably don't have this experience, but looking at us societally, um, there's a gap in how we care for our elders and those who are dying. Um, and just a reminder to you and everyone you care for is that we all have autonomy, no matter what you think. And yes, there are some religious perspectives that influence decision making and personal perspectives, but we have a say in when, where, and how we will die. So empowering people, you know, we really stress autonomy in healthcare, but to empower people even in this stage of life. I've known countless people that have cancer, a malignancy, metastatic cancer, and they they know they're dying, but their oncologists or providers continue to offer medical interventions that would maybe buy them a month, 2 months, 3 months with a poor quality of life, and just reminding them if you're ever supporting people like that, just that you can choose. when and where and how, when to, if you want this treatment or not. Um, and death is not the enemy. One of the misperceptions about hospice is that hospice is a place you go when you die. So, just a reminder, hospice is not a place you go. If you're lucky, you may have an inpatient hospice facility um, in your community. Uh, I don't know if you have one in Birmingham. Do you know, Sean, if you have an inpatient hospice house?
We do. We have one, and there's one in Marshall County, but generally speaking, hospice inpatient houses are not revenue producing. That's why only nonprofits have them, because
Mm,
they're sort of lost leaders in their community service. You
yeah,
see them
they're,
more in states that have a CON, like
mm,
Florida.
mhm, yeah. So we're lucky, you're lucky if you have an inpatient facility. And even if you do, the criteria have become so stringent that you have to meet requirements to be there. So how I define the hospice facility I worked at is it was sort of a hospital for folks on hospice care. So you have to have a medical need. So pain management, symptoms not managed, wound care that needs tending, that needs daily dressing changes, or something more extensive than just a straight up plan of care. Um, and so just not having enough caregivers doesn't qualify you to be there. There may be some ways you can stay there for a short period of time, but it's respite care or whatnot. But you have to have certain criteria to have it be reimbursed 100% by the
Right.
Medicare benefit.
Right.
So,
Lisa Hurd has a comment.
hmm
My father in law just died after over a month in ICU last week. I'm so sorry.
mm,
We're trying to get him home and have hospice step in, however, too medically fragile to try to move him. As an LCSW, it was hard not to step in with his care, was able to take a pause and be there for my mother in law and my husband.
mm. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Mm. I was just thinking about my father, who I'll share with you about his journey in a little bit, and it may resonate. Um, so hospice is the way I describe hospice is that it's a philosophy of care and a system in place for delivering that care. So the philosophy is that we in hospice, the goal is to offer quality, dignified um, care, dignified care while people are in their dying journey, which is 6 months or less prognosis, as defined by the hospice guidelines. So we want to make sure people have a quality of life, pain and symptoms well managed. So that's the philosophy, and have a death that they want or desire, as strange as that may sound. But there's a term that is often used in hospice called self-determined life closure. So you determine that, back to that autonomy. And it's a system in place for delivering that care. So it's that interdisciplinary team that comes into your home, however you define it, a nursing home uh, or residential home. And then we've already talked about if you're lucky to have a inpatient facility, then that's an option too. I won't go into this. I've already said all those things. It came from a Latin root word, hospitium, a place where guests were received with hospitality and lodging. So it's really tending to the person and their family unit, those who are dying. So just a reminder, hospice does not provide 24/7 care for families. This is something that is often not appreciated or forgotten or not unknown to people. They think when hospice comes in, they're going to get a lot more support than they do, which is a lot. The hospice does provide a lot of care, but the majority of it rests on you as an individual, your support system, and your family and community. And as we have this, um, our aging population, we already know we're going to have more caregiver insufficiency, and we already have what we call caregiver insufficiency. So it's something to keep in mind. What we know about hospice care is that it is underutilized. And so we often have delayed referrals to hospice. So timing matters. And what the delayed referrals versus timely referrals. I'll start with the delayed referrals. This is, and I'm assuming um, some of you have seen this kind of approach to death. So delayed referrals often result in crisis driven responses Oftentimes that you have unresolved personal issues, uncertainty, loose ends aren't tied. There's a lot of withdrawal, anxiety, confusion, chaos, fear, and sometimes it leads to fragmented care. What one provider's saying isn't what the other provider's saying, and it's all kind of a confusing soup of emotion, really, and fear. A timely referral often leads to thoughtful, integrated planning, ample emotional support. Your arrangements and affairs are in order. This is the ideal. Connections to loved ones, things not left unsaid. There's a trusted care team that you've established to support you or your loved one. Peace, dignity, comfort, and calm. So that's a good reason to engage with hospice as soon as you can, and not too soon, right? If you want to pursue curative treatments, you don't want to enroll in hospice too early. So something I want to remind us all of is that death, when it's anticipated, so we know about sudden death, you can't predict, you can't anticipate it, but anticipated death is a process. I think people don't fully appreciate that and realize that death is a process, though it can occur rapidly. Majority of deaths, I think 90% occur after a period of illness with gradual deterioration. So about 90% of us will have time to plan for our death. And I don't know if you've seen these trajectories of dying. I find them very useful when we're educating people about death. Um, of course, so on the um, this axis it's function, and below is time. X and Y axis, sorry, time. So sudden death, you're coasting along and you have a massive MI, and that leads to your death. With terminal illness like cancer, a cancer diagnosis, somebody who's diagnosed with cancer who, let's say, doesn't want to do treatment, um, their functional status continues to be pretty good for a while. And then there's a turn that happens, and they have a gradual decline towards death as things progress. I've seen this happen over days to weeks to months to years. So there are times where this happens so fast over a course of a week, and somebody will tell me, "Gosh, how could my mom be dying? Just here, they were driving. Last week they were driving, and now you're telling me they're dying." And that can't happen that fast. So cancer trajectory is different from organ failure, heart failure, COPD. These types of failures or illnesses lead to exacerbations. Here's your functional status. You have an exacerbation like a flare-up of or an infection that leads to worsening respiratory status. You dip down here and then you get to a new baseline, but it never quite gets back to where you were before. And you gradually have these exacerbations, and eventually one of them will lead to your death. So if you have somebody you're taking care of, a patient, family member that is having frequent hospitalizations and keeps coming, let's say three in 3 months, then you probably want to be careful and start to talk about advanced care planning and things. And then frailty, dementia, it looks like this, kind of up and down, gradual decline over a long period of time. And a reminder that talking about death does not hasten death. It creates opportunities for all to really be honest and real with what's happening. And most people who are dying, in my experience, know that they're dying, whether they're admitting it to you, their families, or not. They often try to protect folks, their own loved ones, from pain and anguish. And in some cases, talking about death can really bring a sense of peace to individuals if they're open to discussing their experience. Other people have no interest in talking about death, and they find it stressful. So we really just have to meet people where they are. So all of these are there. That comes back to that individualized approach to death. Like we have to honor people on their terms. So there's no right or wrong way to be with death. And we also know that a little planning, like I said, could go a long way. And the majority of people in this country don't have advance directives. Advance directives are directives, basically statements that are done in advance of an illness, and they include living wills, and appointing somebody to be your decision maker if you could no longer be one, so your own advocate, so healthcare power of attorney. I read this somewhere a while back that a good time to revisit, even if you have done your advance directives, which I think in our country about 35% of folks have them. That number may change post-COVID. That was pre-COVID. Um, just because of the awareness of death and the need for planning and understanding of the fragility of this life. Um, for the so a good time to revisit your advance directives are with the 5 Ds, every decade, when you encounter death, because Your experience of death may inform your desire for your own death. Divorce, a diagnosis of a serious condition, and definitely decline. Those are good times to revisit your plans. So I'm going to pause there before I dive into conscious living and dying. Any other questions, Sean, popping up?
None so far, but
Okay.
we do welcome questions if anyone has anything at all.
Okay. So this idea of conscious living and conscious dying, what does that mean? What does it mean to be conscious? It's not a medical term. It's a term. When I define conscious living, conscious dying, how I define it is having your eyes wide open, being as aware, as honest, as present with what is, so that you can really move forward, move through this life experience and the dying journey with that level of awareness. So this philosophy of conscious living and dying is one that encourages us to live with intention, mindfulness, and awareness while we're acknowledging and preparing for this inevitable reality. So we want to cultivate a meaningful and fulfilling life and support a peaceful and dignified transition at the end of life. You know, there are cases where people have had very challenging lives and very troubled experiences throughout life, and they can transform in the end of life setting. Other people say how you live is how you die. That's not been my experience all the time. Sometimes that's the case, but there are ways to in some traditions around the globe, people prepare for death all their lives. It's just so integrated into the awareness of being human, and it's a holistic approach and in a way more realistic approach to life and death. Oops. Like how would our relationships? I'm sorry. How would our relationships be different if we um, were aware that we may not see this person again who we're fighting with or arguing with? Just having that death awareness can impact our living. Sorry, I'm having trouble here finding the. I keep doing that. Excuse me. I can't find the cursor. There it goes. So, considerations for a conscious life, conscious death is number one, what we've talked about already, kind of what that commission paper mentioned, that death is a natural part of life. Being open in our communication about that, cultivating compassion and empathy for people wherever they are in their comfort level, talking about death, and just compassion and empathy in general for all humans and all beings. Mindfulness, reflections on values, what is meaningful to this person, to you, what does a quality of life mean to you, and then how do you want to be remembered? You know, this idea of ancestors and um, our lineage, like that is a often um, forgotten in our modern world, the our relationship to those who've gone before us, and how do we want to be remembered for those generations once we're no longer here? And then you see advanced care planning and supportive care just as the two pieces of the bigger puzzle of what a conscious life and conscious death would look like. There's this idea of creating an end of life care plan, and that's something that if you've ever been intimately connected to births that are less medicalized, they're birth plans. And an end of life care plan is similar in that you identify and outline how you want to be, at least imagine being cared for at the end of life, knowing that there's a lot of uncertainty. Like you could have a birth plan and want all these beautiful things and may end up having a C-section. And so you just don't know what's coming, but at least you can have some intention at the beginning of the journey. And so an end of life care plan can be created and can involve definitely advanced directives and advanced care planning, but also estate planning, financial considerations, vigil planning, which is that time around the active dying experience. And what could that look like? What smells would you want to have? Would you want to have music playing, aromatherapy, etc.? Legacy work and after death care. After death care is a whole topic in and of itself because just like death was removed from the home um, when with the advancement of modern medicine, care for the body after death has been handed over to professionals in the funeral home industry. And that happened during the Civil War, I believe. Embalming became a thing which hadn't been before. And so there is a whole movement reclaiming care for those dying, care for those who have died, and tending to their bodies with love and reverence and not being so afraid of them. And I'll show you some images. So there is a warning. I'm telling you now, there will be some images of deceased people that I've loved, and so just be prepared.
So we have a comment.
Hmm.
Lisa Hurd says, a former client of mine in Oregon was not afraid of talking about death and dying and was a master woodworker. He made his own casket with instructions for what, where, how after he died. So much fear about talking about end of life. I try very hard to encourage my clients it isn't scary.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. The man I spoke of, Ethan, in the documentary, he had a pine casket that we decorated, and it was just so beautiful to honor him in that way. As an artist himself, he was an artist. So this term I want to just introduce to you is the death doula, and you may already have familiarity with what a death doula is. But there has been a huge increase in the number of people interested in talking about death and engaging with death and shifting our cultural approach to death. Things like death cafes have popped up all over the world. You can look that up if you haven't heard of them. Just creating again spaces where we can normalize conversations about death, grief, and death, dying, and grief. And this movement of the doula, it's sort of a term that was used in the birth doula world as a supportive person for those who are going through these rites of passage, if you will, or life transitions, major ones. Um, and it's a non-medical person. So that's a key. Non-medical means not credentialed, not licensed, support person that provides holistic physical, emotional, and spiritual care for those dying and their loved ones. And this can be way before a diagnosis of a terminal diagnosis, during the dying journey, and after death. And there's this website. I'm going to share this PowerPoint with Sean so you can have it. And you can look up the National End of Life Doula Alliance to see if there are any doulas in your community. Um, in Birmingham, there's a whole collective of doulas forming, and I'm connected to some amazing people there doing this good work. So you can look in your community and see if it's available. There's no standardization or standard education required to be a death doula. So programs range from a 8-hour course to a 10-week course, an apprenticeship or no apprenticeship. So just being aware of that there's no standardization, but these individuals, I'm a death doula as well, provide a level of presence and support that can really supplement the care that's provided elsewhere by the medical system. Right now, very few, I think there's only one hospice I know of that's being creative in how they utilize doulas and compensate doulas, but it's not covered by insurance. So it's often private play, sliding scale, or volunteer based.
We actually have a presentation by the Birmingham Death Doula folks
Oh,
in
great.
May coming up.
Wonderful. I'll have to connect with them and let them know I said hello. I'll let them, I'm giving them a shout out. um, so I want to share two journeys with you. I know we have a little bit more time, yeah. So Paula Brown, she was my mother in love, my husband's mom, and I moved in next door to her in Bessemer, Alabama, which is not far from you all, some of you, and fell in love with her right away. And then a couple of days later met her son and later married him. And she's with my middle child, Avi, who's now 9. And her journey, she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in May of 2019 and took her last breath in July of 2019. So it was a very fast, from diagnosis to her last breath, it was very quick, very rapid. And Sean, I think you met Bud at a gathering. That's how we're connected, right?
I
There's
did.
Bud in that picture. Yeah. Um, that's how I find my way to you guys. But Paula had been declining for a year prior, and nobody could find out. Pancreatic cancer is notorious for being challenging to diagnose and often diagnosed late when it's progressed significantly. So she decided she wanted to die in Asheville, this area she loves so much. She would come visit us all the time, was very connected to her grandkids. And this is her in her final months at her home, surrounded by the grandchildren she loved. Um, and then this is her as she's dying in her final weeks at this point. And I show you this because you see flowers, you see her bedroom, a home environment, the guitar on the bed, harmonica, her son surrounding her, a lot of personal touch, a lot of compassion, kindness, presence. Um, it was just so profound. So I was her death doula, if you will. I supported her in ways that I rallied her community. Her six sisters came, provided that 24/7 care. So I was pregnant at the time with our third, and so it just was such a collaborative experience. And many of you have, well, I wouldn't say many. There are people who have this level of support, and so this may be very familiar to you. Her sisters would crawl in the bed with her and love on her, rub her head. Uh, in a hospital setting, sometimes you don't know how intimate you can be with your loved one. You may want to crawl in bed, but there's all these wires and tubes, and you don't always have that ability to get so cozy with your loved one who's dying. Or there may be fear. Some people have fear of touching a dying person, not knowing if they're going to hurt them or cause distress, or just their own discomfort with the physical changes that they're witnessing. So again, just encouraging and inviting, not even so much encouraging, it's just an invitation. You'd crawl in bed and love on a person. Um, Jay's, I'm sorry, Paula's youngest sister, she was the oldest of seven. Her youngest sister was a journalist and photojournalist. So she took these pictures unbeknownst to us. But this was around the time of her last breath. I think she had just taken her last breath. She was surrounded by us. She was held by us. Again, all these flowers and nature looking out the window. It was really a beautiful setting, and she died very peacefully. Something about Paula's death, too, is pancreatic cancer is notoriously painful. And we brought in music therapy, aromatherapy, acupuncture, um, CBD, massage, all the things that you can imagine, sound healing. And her medicine requirements were very minimal. And I was very struck by that because I didn't know how uncomfortable she'd be. So that's another thing, like just remembering that there are ways to control symptoms that aren't just pharmaceutical, that can actually contribute to alertness and presence in a way that sometimes the medications can cloud, the sensorium, your ability to be mentally clear. And after she died, we did a home funeral for her and we prepared her body. This was something that nobody in the family had heard of. Nobody in the family felt comfortable even doing it. They said to me, I don't know if I could possibly tend to Paula's body after she dies. It sounded very scary to them, unfamiliar. And so I remember looking to Jay and including his immediate family. And I looked at Jay, my husband, her son, and just said, honey, are we going to do this? Like, I want to do this for her. Are you comfortable doing this? If nobody else can participate. And we agreed to do it. And then um, when she took her last breath, it was amazing to see how many people stepped in to offer her support and adorn her body with flowers. This is our daughter who we get offered, we gave her an opportunity to participate. We didn't force her, we didn't even encourage her. We just said, honey, this is what we're going to do. Would you like to participate? How we approach death with children is it's a personal decision. But what we do know is that how comfortable we are around death impacts their experience of the dying person and caring for a dying body. So if we're anxious and uncomfortable and awkward, then that will rub off. And so Sahana decided she wanted to do it and participated. And here she is, Paula's lying in honor in the back here. Um, and the children just did artwork and grieved the way they know how to grieve through art and play, and processed what was happening. And here's an image of Paula adorned with flowers. And then we did a green burial. So green burials are an emerging, it's sort of a return to old ways of being with death, but it's a way of tending to the body and burying a body that is more sustainable, better for the environment, more natural. There's not a big vault, there's not a lot of cement, not a lot of wood. Um, and so this was a green burial. And so she's in a shroud, what they call a shroud. We gathered at the graveside. It was a hand dug grave, and we got to participate. Here are the children at the memorial. And this proximity to a body, it's rare. Um, and then we got to lower her into the ground and throw flowers on her, and then ultimately close the site. And that's Carolina Memorial Sanctuary in Asheville. Any questions about that before I go to the next story? No?
There were no questions. Lisa Hurd said, "Thank you for sharing. In 2016, we did exactly the same for my dad."
Beautiful.
I will say those images to me remind me so much of traveling in Southeast Asia, specifically in Bali, where families might save really months or years for a funeral, and then it would be an event, a community event in which their neighbors and friends came into the home. They had a parade of the body through town, and then they had a cremation there, in the midst of town. And there was so much proximity to death, and it was sort of a celebration in a way,
Hmm.
which I was triggered by that, by the burial that you described.
Yeah. And I think this way of, for me, supporting Paula in this way supported me in my grieving journey with her. And that people who have um, pregnancy loss, they have a right to take the infant home out of the morgue to their home to keep them in honor and put them in the ground themselves. And in most states, there are certain requirements and regulatory requirements. But even that, for some women who've done that, it allowed for them to say goodbye in a way that didn't involve just rushing the baby off into a morgue and burying him. It has that proximity to death and that hands-on approach to the after death care can really be supportive. It's not for everybody, but to know that that's an option, I think, is something um, to be aware of. And then there are home funeral guides. There's a Home Funeral Alliance. You can look them up. And again, just like you could find a doula, and actually, if you had a doula, they may already be aware of options in your community. But um, yeah, just something to consider.
Emma Lovett asked, "Do you have to have any special clearances for a green burial like this? I'm interested in more information. If you have any resources about this, you can share."
Yeah, thank you. No, I mean the Home Funeral Alliance would be a place to go to find out more. Not every community has a green burial ground, but they'll guide you into the requirements. Everything has to be biodegradable. That's the only thing. Um, but there are some more traditional funeral homes that are having a green burial option, so they'll guide you through all that. There's no real requirements. It's more challenging if you want to bury on your property. That there's a lot of requirements there, but which is also legal in most places. It's a good question. Thank you. All right. So my dad, Kapil Sethi.
Sorry to interrupt. Jennifer
Okay.
Lord shared with everyone in the chat, if you're not able to see it, The Good Earth, Alabama's first green burial ground. It's an article from AL.com.
Oh, thank you. Nice. So my father was this summer, he's 71, and he was picking flowers on a rock ledge at his house, and he fell. And he hit his head and had a traumatic brain injury. And he was in the ICU in Asheville for 16 days, and it was really clear there was absolutely no um, hope for meaningful recovery. And he was a prominent movement disorder specialist. And the Lancet also did an article about him. He was born in India and would run in the streets of India, riding on water buffaloes. And he had all my life he's talked about death so openly. And I think that's why I'm in the work that I'm doing is that he was so comfortable with it and he wanted us to honor his wishes. And so he had everything laid out in terms of what he would want if something like this happened. Um, how he wouldn't want to be a vegetable, he wouldn't want to, all the things. And when I say the importance of speaking to your family about your wishes, I can't stress that enough. Like what a gift it was to me to know. And we still have to return to what would he want? What would he have wanted? Because my mom is still questioning, do we extubate him too quickly? Do we um, do all those things? So after 16 days, there was no hope for meaningful recovery, and we chose to extubate him. And um, here he is in the ICU, and he was a neurologist, a brain movement disorder specialist, and he knew the brain better than anybody I know. And here are his colleagues from the Medical College of Georgia that drove up to Asheville to look at these scans. Like, he had the best care, surrounded by. We brought music and ritual into the ICU. This is the day he was extubated. So many people were present. It was as beautiful an experience as I could have imagined in the ICU. But the day he was extubated, it was so apparent that he was stable and he wasn't changing, and the room was overflowing with people, and my children were in wanting to come, and the younger ones were not allowed in the ICU. Um, and so we looked at each other and we thought, do you think we can get him to the Center for Conscious Living and Dying, which I'll speak to now? Um, because it's surrounded by nature, the kids could be running free, and it would provide a different dying experience for him and our family. And so that's what we did. We rallied and got him to the center. And here is an image of my daughter and my nephew. And as we rolled into the center, a rainbow emerged, and it was just profound. This is the view from the backyard of the center. And um, he ended up arriving within hours of his final breath. So we got him out of the ambulance. We rolled him down the back sidewalk into the suites, into this home, which is uh, I'll speak to this. So it's part of. So I'm going to back up. I'm pause. Sorry. So when during the AIDS crisis, when people were not able to die in the hospital, it was over. It was they were full. Families exiled their loved ones who had AIDS because of the social stigma attached with that, um, and there was no place to go to die. These individuals opened up their homes, rallied community to support individuals who were dying of AIDS, mainly in New England. And over time, those homes continued to be a place for people to die while held in community. And a network formed called the Omega Home Network. And you can look that up, omegahome.network.org. And there are about 40 in operation, 40 in development. And after I took care of Ethan, the young man I spoke of, it was really clear, like, what did we do for this man that was so unique and special? All we did was, I mean, it takes some work, but all we did was rally community, provide a home environment, provide that 24/7 care. Hospice came into the home to provide all the medical care, just like they would a residential home, and we provided love and support and 24/7 care. And so that is the model that I researched after I left and created. The Center for Conscious Living and Dying is a nonprofit and has a branch of direct care, which is providing care for people who are dying in a home setting. As I mentioned, hospice comes into this home, so we're not providing medical care. We provide 24/7 volunteer care free of charge to those who are dying and their families. Um, and so that is that one part of what we're doing. And then we have this active, robust community that are learning the skills, basically volunteerism, but a lot of self reflection and contemplation to ensure that they can show up with full presence and love and not bring their own fears and doubts and really contemplate mortality for themselves. So, backing up, so we rolled him down, we brought him into the room. I was met with the volunteers with so much love. To be on the receiving end of this was surprising, and still I'm integrating it. So I'm tender around it, but it was so powerful to receive that love and to be held and to have my family be supported. And like I said, the children running around. Um, and he took his final breath after our community choir came and sang to him, and he died that evening. And so that evening we also did a home funeral for 2 days after that, and he stayed at the center, and family came and friends came, and it was a powerful thing to be held in the community in this way. Sorry, I keep losing the cursor, keeps disappearing. Apologies to make you dizzy. Hmm. So here again, once again, art for the children. So some of the volunteer members provided chalk, and the kids got to draw and honor their bapu, is what they called him. And yeah, it the we also have a group of fire tenders that keep a fire going, like in other traditions around the world. Fire is such an anchoring force and a healing force and a way to stay connected to the elements. And so we offered that. The fire was going and being tended to as my father was dying. And we all went to the fire after he died and just cried. My young son wailed and was held in community as well. So that is the work of the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. And my hope is that people are inspired to create these communities in their home, per the Lancet article. Can we get creative as we take care of each other? What would we want for ourselves? These are the questions that I invite you to ponder. And you can visit our website, Ways to Stay Connected, or the website is CCLD, that's our acronym, .community. The movie is The Last Ecstatic Days movie. And then you can see my website and a TED Talk that I've done. So
Well,
thank you
excellent.
all. Yeah,
We have
thank you so
one
much.
question. Rory Placentia is asking any tips for trying to convince stubborn family members to either create POAs, advance directives, or let us know of their wishes.
Creative ways. I think by the time a lot of us in the healthcare field are seeing folks, it's like that reactive way of being. So I don't know if you're speaking to people that are coming to you while their loved ones are in need acutely of planning, or if you're still speaking upstream. I think if we're talking upstream, then I think organizing a death cafe in your practice where people can just to start talking about their experiences with death before having them do the paperwork. I think ongoing, just normalizing the conversations, getting creative in that way. There's something called death over dinner. If you want to do that with your friends and family, you can host a death over dinner, and there's a whole template of how to host the party and have really meaningful conversations. So, um, stubborn family members, I don't know. I think the more we can normalize it upstream, the better. But it's challenging when people aren't interested.
Barbara writes this very interesting presentation. Thank you so much for sharing. Lacey Vincent, thank you so much for sharing today. This has been wonderful. Felicia Judkins, wonderful presentation. Thank you. Roy Presentia, I'm speaking personally. My parents are in good health, and that's the problem. Death is a far off concept for them that they don't need to worry about right now.
Right. There's never a good time to talk about death, right? That's the funny thing. Like when people are well, it's like, oh, why are we talking about this? We don't need to talk about this. But then when you're in a crisis or when you get diagnosed with cancer, people are like, oh, don't talk about death. Let's beat the cancer, fight it. And then when you're on the deathbed, even sometimes people. So when is a good time to talk about death? That's the question. So I'm with you. It's a big dilemma.
Jennifer Calder asked, how long does the family, friends, receive care after a loved one's death?
Are you speaking to at the center or?
I'm assuming that's the question.
Yeah, yeah. Um, our hope is at least a year of ongoing support, but some of the people we've cared for have become volunteers. So because we don't have the professional boundaries, et cetera, like we can be creative too in how we support each other after a loved one dies.
Janae Williams says she loves the thought of a death cafe and
Mhm.
death over dinner. Keisha Banks McMillan says, wonderful presentation, as does Lisa Hurd. Thank you so much. Erlene Taylor says, surprised to learn of a new way of burial. What is the cost to the family?
So actually, green burials often are much less expensive than a traditional burial. I want to say 2 to 4 thousand, depending if you have a casket or we had a shroud, which was like a $200, and then I think 3,000 for the plot. So it varies, but more affordable than a traditional burial.
Heather Polk says, thank you for sharing your story and advocating on behalf of others. And as we're near the end of the hour, I'll give the password and the link again. So one more time, the link for the evaluation to receive credit for today is https://www.surveymonkey.com lowercase r / all uppercase Y, T as in Texas, X, N as in Nancy, 3, C as in cat, F as in Frank. And our password is conscious with a capital C. And I'll spell conscious. It's hard for me to spell, but I think I've got it correct. Capital CONSCIOUS. Conscious is the password. Thank you so much, Dr. Sethi. It's really been refreshing. You are such a obviously kind and calm person, and I've enjoyed spending an hour with you. And it's been really it's refreshing and invigorating to learn about what you had to say. I look forward to receiving your PowerPoint, and I'll share that with others. And thank you again so much, not only for doing this today, but for the work you do and have done throughout your career.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
All right, everybody have a great week. Join us back in 2 weeks when we will be here. And what is our topic in 2 weeks? It escapes me, but come back in 2 weeks and we'll see you again. Have a great week.